There's something almost invisible about the way some people carry pain. You could sit next to them on a train, work beside them for years, even share a home with them and never know the weight they're holding. They don't cry out. They don't collapse. They don't ask for help or demand attention. They simply endure, quietly, steadily, as if suffering is a private language only they speak. You might recognize them if you look closely. They're the ones who say, "I'm fine," with a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. The ones who nod along in conversations but rarely speak about themselves. The ones who show up for others no matter what, but when asked about their own struggles, they wave it away as if their pain is too small to mention. And here's the thing about people who endure quietly. Their silence isn't weakness. It's a survival strategy. One they learned long before they had words for what they were carrying. Because for most of them, enduring quietly didn't begin in adulthood. It began in childhood. In the small moments when they learned that their needs made others uncomfortable. Maybe they had a parent who was overwhelmed, exhausted, or emotionally unavailable. Maybe they grew up in a household where showing emotion meant being dismissed, punished, or ignored. Or maybe they simply learned by watching that the people who complained got labeled as difficult while the ones who stayed quiet were called good. Children are incredibly perceptive. They don't need to be told explicitly that their feelings are inconvenient. They can sense it in the sigh when they cry, in the turned back when they ask for attention, in the silence that follows their attempts to share excitement or fear. And over time, those small moments accumulate into a powerful internal belief. My feelings are too much. My pain is a burden. I need to handle this alone. Psychologists call this emotional self-sufficiency. And while it sounds like a strength, it often functions as armor. It's the child's way of adapting to an environment where vulnerability wasn't safe. So they learn to swallow tears, to minimize hurt, to carry themselves through difficult moments without reaching out. And they get praised for it. They're called mature, responsible, independent. But beneath that independence is often a quiet loneliness they can't name. Imagine being 7 years old and falling off your bike, scraping your knee badly enough that blood runs down your shin. You run home crying, expecting comfort, but your parent is on an important phone call. They glance at you, wave you toward the bathroom, mouth the words "you're okay." You stand there for a moment, tears still wet on your cheeks, then quietly go wash the wound yourself. You find the bandage, apply it carefully, and never mention it again. That moment, small as it seems, teaches you something profound. Your pain is less important than whatever else is happening. You learn to handle it alone. Now imagine that happening not once, but dozens of times throughout childhood. Different situations, same message. Your excitement about a good grade gets met with distracted nodding. Your fear about a nightmare gets dismissed with "you're too old for this." Your sadness about a friendship ending gets responded to with "that's just how life is, get over it." Each time, you learn a little more. You learn that your internal world is something to manage privately, that expressing it creates inconvenience, that the safest way to be is to need nothing. What happens in the brain during these formative years is profound. When a child's emotional needs are consistently unmet or dismissed, their nervous system adapts. The stress response, meant to activate temporarily during threats, begins to run quietly in the background all the time. Cortisol levels remain elevated. The body learns to brace for disappointment, and the neural pathways that connect emotional distress to seeking comfort start to weaken, because there's no reliable comfort to be found. Instead, new pathways form. Pathways that say, when I'm hurting, I need to hide it. Pathways that connect vulnerability with danger. Pathways that make self-reliance not a choice, but a default setting etched into the architecture of the developing brain. This is why for many adults who endure quietly, reaching out for help doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels fundamentally unsafe, like exposing a soft underbelly to a world that might strike. And so they grow up learning to be strong. But strength here isn't what it appears to be. It's not confidence or resilience born from support. It's a kind of frozen composure, a learned stillness that keeps the world from seeing what's underneath. Because underneath, there's often a tremendous amount happening. Thoughts spiraling, emotions churning, pain accumulating in places no one thinks to look. Think about how this shows up in daily life. The person who endures quietly often becomes the one everyone leans on. They're the friend who listens for hours but never shares their own struggles. The colleague who takes on extra work without complaint. The family member who holds everything together while their own world is falling apart. And people assume they're just naturally strong, naturally capable, naturally unaffected by stress. But here's what most people miss. That strength is exhausting. It's not a gift they were born with. It's a role they were assigned long ago, and now they don't know how to put it down. Because the moment they let the mask slip, the moment they admit they're struggling, they fear what will happen. Will they be seen as weak? Will they disappoint the people who depend on them? Will they be told their problems aren't that bad? Or worse, will they be ignored entirely just like they were as children? Watch them in a meeting at work when things go wrong. Everyone else might be panicking, voicing concerns, expressing frustration. But they sit quietly, already mentally reorganizing, already figuring out how to fix it, already taking on more than their share because that's what they do. Afterward, someone might thank them for staying calm, for being so reliable. And they'll smile and say it's nothing, even though inside they're wondering when it became their job to hold everyone else's anxiety while swallowing their own. This is where the psychology gets especially painful. People who endure quietly often develop what's called high-functioning depression or hidden suffering. From the outside, their life looks together. They go to work, they maintain relationships, they fulfill their responsibilities. But inside, they're barely holding on. The gap between their internal experience and external presentation becomes a chasm they navigate every single day. And because they're so good at hiding it, people rarely notice. There's no obvious breakdown, no dramatic cry for help, no visible collapse. Just a slow, steady erosion of the self. A quiet fading that happens in the spaces between smiles, in the moments alone at night, in the shower where no one can hear them finally let the tears fall. They might drive home from work with a pleasant expression, wave at a neighbor, unlock their door, and the moment it closes behind them, the mask drops. They lean against the wall, suddenly aware of how heavy everything feels, how tired they are of performing okayness. But by morning, the mask is back in place. No one saw the moment of collapse, so as far as the world knows, they're fine. They're always fine. Neuroscience shows us that emotional suppression, the habitual pushing down of feelings, takes a measurable toll on both brain and body. When emotions are consistently suppressed rather than processed, they don't disappear. They get stored in the body as tension, in the nervous system as hypervigilance, in the mind as intrusive thoughts. Studies using brain imaging have found that chronic emotional suppression is linked to increased activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotional response. In simpler terms, people who endure quietly often live in a state of constant low-level anxiety. Their bodies are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Their minds are always scanning for threats, for signs that they need to brace themselves again. This hypervigilance can look like being overly responsible, constantly anticipating others' needs, or having difficulty relaxing even in safe situations. Because when you've learned that safety is temporary and that your needs might be dismissed at any moment, your nervous system never fully settles. Even in moments that should be restful, they can't quite let go. They're at a party but mentally cataloging who might need support. They're on vacation but already thinking about what they'll need to handle when they return. They're lying in bed but running through tomorrow's responsibilities, next week's challenges, the things they haven't said, the people they might have disappointed. Their mind, trained for decades to stay alert, doesn't know how to truly rest. There's also a profound loneliness that comes with this way of being. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unseen. You can be surrounded by people, deeply loved even, and still feel fundamentally isolated because no one knows what you're actually experiencing. You've become so skilled at presenting a manageable version of yourself that the real you, the one who hurts and struggles and needs, has become invisible. And the tragic irony is that this invisibility often perpetuates itself. Because when you endure quietly, people assume you're okay. They don't check in as often. They don't think to offer support. Not out of cruelty, but simply because you've given them no indication that anything is wrong. So the very coping mechanism that helped you survive childhood, the ability to hide your pain, becomes the thing that keeps you isolated in adulthood. Think about the last time someone casually asked how you are. If you're someone who endures quietly, you probably said fine or good or can't complain, even if none of those words were true. And the person asking probably accepted your answer and moved on because why wouldn't they? You seemed fine. Your voice was steady. Your face showed nothing alarming. They had no reason to dig deeper, no way to know that beneath that simple fine was a universe of unspoken struggle. And you didn't want them to dig deeper anyway. Because what would you even say? How do you explain that you're drowning when there's no water? How do you articulate that you're exhausted from carrying things no one can see? How do you admit you're struggling when you can't point to any single catastrophic event that justifies it? So you say fine and move on, and the loneliness deepens just a little more. Attachment theory offers another lens for understanding this. John Bowlby's research showed that children develop internal working models of relationships based on their early experiences with caregivers. When caregivers are consistently responsive and attuned, children develop secure attachment, a sense that the world is safe and that their needs matter. But when caregivers are inconsistent, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable, children often develop what's called avoidant attachment. People with avoidant attachment learn to minimize their emotional needs and to rely heavily on themselves. They become uncomfortable with intimacy, not because they don't want connection, but because closeness feels unpredictable and potentially painful. This is the blueprint many people who endure quietly are working from. They want connection desperately, but they've learned to approach it with one foot always out the door, ready to retreat back into self-sufficiency if things get too vulnerable. In romantic relationships, this pattern can be particularly challenging. The person who endures quietly often chooses partners who won't push too hard for emotional intimacy. Or they might choose partners who need a lot of support, because being the helper feels safer than being the one who needs help. They excel at giving but struggle terribly with receiving. When their partner asks, "What do you need?" or "How can I support you?" they often freeze, genuinely unable to answer because they've spent so long disconnected from their own needs. Their partner might eventually say something like, "I feel like I don't really know you," or "You never let me in," or "I want to help but you won't let me." And they'll feel guilty, aware that they're creating distance but unsure how to bridge it. Because bridging it would require admitting vulnerability, would require believing that their needs won't be met with the same dismissal they learned to expect as children. And that belief, even when rationally they know their partner is safe, remains elusive. And when conflict arises, as it inevitably does in any relationship, they tend to shut down rather than fight. They might agree to things they don't actually agree with just to avoid confrontation. They might say it's fine when it's not fine, then silently resent the situation later. Or they might simply withdraw, creating distance as a way to regulate the discomfort of being seen in their struggle. Their partners often describe them as hard to read, as emotionally distant even when physically present. But it's not that they don't feel. It's that they feel too much and have no pathway to express it safely. The emotional intensity that lives inside them is so at odds with the calm exterior they maintain that they themselves often feel like two different people. The one the world sees and the one who exists only in private, in the dark, in the moments when the armor finally comes off. This split, what psychologists might call fragmentation of self, is exhausting to maintain. It requires constant monitoring, constant self-regulation, constant performance of okayness. And over time, many people who live this way start to lose touch with what they actually feel. They become so practiced at suppressing and minimizing that when someone genuinely asks how they are, they honestly don't know anymore. There's a concept in psychology called alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing one's own emotions. While it can have various causes, it's often seen in people who learned early on to disconnect from their feelings as a survival mechanism. When you spend years pushing emotions down, the neural pathways that help you recognize and name those emotions can actually weaken. You start experiencing feelings as vague physical sensations, a tightness in the chest, a knot in the stomach, a heaviness in the limbs, but you can't quite articulate what emotion you're feeling or why. This is one reason why people who endure quietly often struggle in therapy. When a therapist asks, "What are you feeling right now?" they might genuinely draw a blank, not because they're being resistant, but because they've lost fluency in the language of their own emotional experience. They need to slowly relearn how to tune in, how to sit with discomfort, how to name what's happening inside them without immediately pushing it away. And that relearning is possible, but it's not easy. It requires creating conditions of safety that many of these individuals have never truly experienced. It requires someone, whether a therapist, a trusted friend, or a partner who can sit with their pain without trying to fix it, without minimizing it, without making it about themselves. Someone who can simply say, "I see you. What you're carrying is real. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." But even when that safe person exists, accepting help remains difficult. There's often a deep shame attached to needing support, a voice that says, "Other people have it worse," or "I should be able to handle this," or "I don't want to be a burden." These thoughts aren't just passing concerns. They're core beliefs that have been reinforced over years, sometimes decades. The fear of being a burden is particularly powerful. Many people who endure quietly would rather suffer indefinitely than risk inconveniencing someone else with their pain. They've internalized the message that their needs are too much, that they're asking for too much, that they're fundamentally too much. So they make themselves smaller, quieter, less needy, hoping that if they just require less, they'll be more lovable, more acceptable, more worthy of staying. This belief often has roots in childhood experiences where they literally witnessed what happened when they expressed needs. Maybe they saw a parent's frustration, a sibling's resentment, or a caregiver's exhaustion. Maybe they heard phrases like, "Don't be so dramatic," or "You're fine," or "I have enough to deal with without you adding to it." Children don't have the cognitive sophistication to understand that an adult's inability to meet their needs says nothing about their worthiness. They simply conclude, "I'm too much, I need to need less." And that conclusion becomes a life sentence. Because even when circumstances change, even when they're surrounded by people who genuinely care and want to support them, that old belief remains. It whispers in moments of vulnerability, telling them to pull back, to handle it alone, to not risk being too much ever again. There's also a paradox in how people who endure quietly relate to others' suffering. They often have extraordinary empathy, a deep capacity to hold space for others' pain without judgment or discomfort. They're the ones friends call in crisis, the ones who show up at 3 in the morning, who listen without trying to fix, who can sit with heavy emotions without flinching. This empathy often comes from intimate familiarity with suffering. They know what it's like to hurt in silence, so when someone else is hurting, they offer the presence they wish someone had offered them. But this creates an imbalance. They become givers who can't receive, supporters who won't be supported, listeners who won't speak. And while their friends and loved ones might appreciate their steadiness, they also sense something is missing. There's a wall, subtle but impenetrable, that keeps the relationship from achieving true reciprocity. Because reciprocity requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires believing that your needs won't be met with rejection or dismissal. Notice how they respond when someone tries to reciprocate care. A friend says, "You're always there for me, let me be there for you." And they smile and say, "I'm okay, really, but thank you." The friend persists, "No, really, you can talk to me." And they deflect again, maybe share something small and manageable, something that sounds like vulnerability but doesn't actually expose the depths of what they're carrying. The friend feels they've connected, feels they've been let in, never knowing they've only been allowed into the foyer while the rest of the house remains locked. Developmental psychologists have found that children need what's called affect attunement from their caregivers. This is the process where a caregiver recognizes a child's emotional state and responds in a way that validates and reflects that emotion back to them. When a baby cries and the parent responds with soothing, the baby learns, "My distress matters," and brings comfort. When a toddler shows excitement and the parent mirrors that joy, the child learns, "My happiness is shared and amplified." But when affect attunement is consistently absent, when emotional expressions are met with disconnection or dismissal, children don't learn to trust their emotions. They learn to doubt them, to hide them, to question whether what they're feeling is even real or valid. This is the foundation upon which people who endure quietly build their lives, a foundation of doubt about their own emotional reality. And this doubt follows them everywhere. When something hurts, they immediately question whether it should hurt. When they need something, they wonder if they're being unreasonable. When they feel overwhelmed, they compare themselves to others who seem to be handling more and conclude they're being weak. This constant self-invalidation is perhaps the cruelest aspect of enduring quietly. Not only are they suffering, but they're also telling themselves they shouldn't be suffering, that their pain isn't legitimate, that they need to get over it and move on. This internal invalidation often manifests physically. The body, unable to express what the mind suppresses, begins to speak in other languages. Chronic headaches, digestive issues, muscle tension, fatigue, insomnia. These somatic symptoms are the body's way of saying something is wrong, even when the person consciously insists everything is fine. Research in psychosomatic medicine has consistently shown that emotional suppression is correlated with a wide range of physical health issues, from cardiovascular problems to autoimmune disorders. The body keeps the score, as trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk famously put it. And for people who endure quietly, the score is often kept in places they don't immediately connect to emotional experience. A tightness in the jaw from years of not speaking up. Shallow breathing from constantly bracing against feeling too much. A perpetual knot in the stomach from swallowing words that needed to be said. They might wake up with their shoulders hunched to their ears, tension held so deeply they don't even notice it anymore. They might clench their teeth at night, grinding away stress their conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. They might have digestive problems that doctors can't quite explain, a body in constant fight or flight mode even when there's no visible threat. Because the threat isn't outside. It's the accumulated weight of everything they've never allowed themselves to express. What makes this particularly insidious is that these physical symptoms often get treated in isolation, divorced from their emotional origins. Someone might go to doctor after doctor for migraines or digestive issues, trying medication after medication, never making the connection that their body might be expressing what their voice cannot. And because they've spent so long disconnecting from their emotional experience, they themselves might not see the link. The idea that their chronic pain could be related to chronic emotional suppression feels almost absurd. But the connection is real and it's measurable. Studies using brain imaging have shown that emotional pain and physical pain activate many of the same neural pathways. The brain doesn't always distinguish between a broken bone and a broken heart. Both register as threats to well-being. Both trigger stress responses. Both demand attention and care. The difference is that physical pain is socially acceptable to acknowledge, while emotional pain, especially for those who have learned to endure quietly, often is not. There's another dimension to this that deserves attention. The way people who endure quietly navigate success and achievement. Many of them are high achievers, driven by an unconscious belief that if they just accomplish enough, prove themselves valuable enough, they'll finally earn the care and attention they never received unconditionally. So they work harder, push further, achieve more, all while their internal experience remains one of inadequacy and emptiness. This is sometimes called the imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome, though those terms don't quite capture the full complexity. It's not just that they doubt their achievements. It's that they're seeking external validation to fill an internal void that no amount of achievement can actually fill. Because what they needed wasn't to prove their worth through accomplishment. What they needed was to be valued simply for existing, for being who they are, not what they do. But since they never learned to believe in their inherent worth, they keep achieving, keep producing, keep performing, hoping that eventually it will be enough. And it never is. No amount of praise, no level of success, no external validation can heal the wound of feeling fundamentally unseen. That healing can only come from within, from slowly learning to offer themselves the attunement and care they never received. Watch them receive a promotion or an award. Others might celebrate openly, but they deflect. "Oh, I just got lucky," or "it wasn't that big a deal," or "anyone could have done it." They minimize their own success as automatically as they minimize their own pain, because both success and pain draw attention, and attention feels dangerous. Attention means being seen, and being seen means being vulnerable to judgment, to disappointment, to abandonment. So they stay small even when they're succeeding. They attribute accomplishments to external factors, luck or timing or other people's help, never allowing themselves to own their competence. And when they do achieve something undeniable, something that can't be deflected or minimized, they immediately move the goalpost. "That was good, but now I need to do this next thing." They never arrive at enough because the target keeps moving, always just beyond reach. The process of healing for people who endure quietly is not about becoming loud. It's not about suddenly expressing every feeling or sharing every struggle. For many, that would feel just as inauthentic as the silence. Instead, healing is about developing what psychologists call emotional flexibility, the ability to choose how and when to express what they're feeling rather than defaulting to suppression out of fear or habit. It starts with something that sounds simple but feels revolutionary for those who have spent a lifetime minimizing their experience. It starts with noticing. Just noticing without judgment what they're actually feeling in any given moment. Not what they think they should feel, not what would be convenient to feel, but what is actually present. Sadness, anger, fear, loneliness, exhaustion. Noticing without immediately pushing it away or talking themselves out of it. This practice of mindful awareness, of simply being with what is, can feel incredibly uncomfortable at first. Because what often emerges is years, sometimes decades, of unfelt feelings. The grief that was never mourned, the anger that was never expressed, the fear that was never validated, all of it waiting, patient and persistent, for someone to finally turn toward it with compassion. And that someone needs to be, first and foremost, themselves. Self-compassion is a concept that researcher Kristin Neff has studied extensively. It's the practice of treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend who was struggling. For people who endure quietly, this is often the hardest thing to learn. They're experts at compassion for others but brutal with themselves. They hold themselves to impossible standards while making endless allowances for everyone else. Learning to turn that compassion inward requires questioning beliefs that feel like facts. Beliefs like, "I should be stronger," or "I shouldn't need help," or "other people have it worse." Each of these thoughts, when examined closely, reveals not truth but learned patterns of self-denial. and each one can be gently challenged. Says who? What if I don't have to be stronger right now? What if needing help is just part of being human? What if my pain doesn't have to be the worst pain to still matter? This internal dialogue, this questioning of old narratives, is where real change begins. Not in dramatic gestures or sudden transformations, but in small moments of choosing differently. Choosing to say, actually, I'm not okay when someone asks. Choosing to ask for help even when every fiber of their being screams that they shouldn't. Choosing to set a boundary even when it feels selfish. Each small choice is an act of rebellion against a lifetime of silencing themselves. Imagine the first time they actually answer honestly when someone asks how they are. The question comes casually, how are you? And instead of the automatic fine, they pause. They take a breath. They say, actually, I've been struggling a bit. The words feel foreign in their mouth, dangerous even, but they say them anyway, and the world doesn't end. The person doesn't recoil. Sometimes they even lean in, say, tell me more, offer presence without judgment. And in that moment, something shifts. A tiny crack in the armor, a small proof that vulnerability doesn't always lead to abandonment. And it's important to acknowledge that this process is not linear. There will be days when speaking up feels possible and days when silence feels like the only safe option. There will be moments of progress and moments of profound regression. Healing doesn't follow a straight line. It spirals, returns to old wounds, revisits familiar patterns slowly, gradually, creating new pathways alongside the old. Support during this process is crucial, but it needs to be the right kind of support. People who endure quietly don't need someone to fix them or rescue them. They need someone who can tolerate their pain without trying to make it go away quickly. Someone who understands that silence doesn't always mean okay, and that fine often means anything but. Someone patient enough to wait for the real story to emerge, which might take weeks, months, or years of consistent presence. This kind of support is rare. It requires emotional maturity, patience, and the ability to sit with discomfort. Many people, with the best intentions, rush in trying to solve or minimize, not realizing that what the person needs most is simply to be witnessed, to have their experience acknowledged as real and valid without qualification or comparison. There's a particular kind of healing that happens when someone who has endured quietly for their entire life finally encounters this quality of presence. Something in them begins to soften. The armor, held in place for so long, can start to come down. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to let a little light in, enough to remember what it feels like to not carry everything alone. And perhaps this is where we begin to understand the deeper purpose in enduring quietly. It's not that the suffering served a grand plan or that there's some cosmic reason for the pain. But people who have known that particular kind of loneliness often develop a profound sensitivity to others' hidden struggles. They become the ones who notice the person standing alone at the party, who check in on the friend who insists they're fine, who create space for others to be vulnerable, because they know the cost of never having that space themselves. Their pain, though it shouldn't have been necessary, becomes a kind of training in human compassion. They learn to read between the lines, to hear what's not being said, to recognize the subtle signs of someone else carrying more than they're showing. And while this doesn't erase what they've endured, it does give it meaning, transforms it from senseless suffering into hard-won wisdom about the human condition. But we must be careful here. It's important not to romanticize their struggle or suggest that suffering is noble or necessary for growth. Many people who endure quietly would gladly trade their emotional depth for a childhood where they felt safe enough to cry, to need, to be imperfect without consequence. The depth they've gained came at a steep price, and that price should be acknowledged, not celebrated. What we can say is that where you are now, having endured so much quietly, is not a place of permanent residence. The patterns that kept you silent, that taught you to minimize and hide, those patterns can change. The nervous system can learn safety. The heart can learn to trust again. The voice, so long suppressed, can find its way back. This doesn't mean you'll become someone unrecognizable. You might always be more reserved than others, more thoughtful before speaking, more careful with your vulnerability. But reserved doesn't have to mean silenced. Thoughtful doesn't have to mean self-denying. And careful vulnerability is still vulnerability, still connection, still a bridge between your internal world and the world outside. Think about the subtle ways change manifests. Maybe one day you're having lunch with a friend and they ask how you are, and instead of deflecting, you share something real. Just a small thing, a mention that work has been stressful or that you've been tired lately. And your friend responds with care, asks follow-up questions, doesn't make it weird or uncomfortable. That moment, small as it is, becomes evidence. Evidence that your experience matters. Evidence that people can handle your reality. Evidence that vulnerability doesn't always end in rejection. Or maybe you're at work and someone asks you to take on another project, and instead of automatically saying yes even though you're already overwhelmed, you pause. You consider your actual capacity, and you say, "I'd like to help, but I'm at my limit right now." The words feel almost rebellious after years of never saying no, but you say them, and the world doesn't collapse. Your colleague finds someone else. Life goes on, and you go home that night with just a little less weight on your shoulders. The people who love you, truly love you, don't need you to be endlessly strong. They're not staying because you never need anything. They're staying, or they should be, because they see something in you worth staying for, something beyond your utility or your ability to hold it together. And if you've never tested that, if you've never let them see you fall apart, you might be surprised to discover that they don't leave. That your worst fear, the one that's kept you silent all these years, might not be true. Of course, some people will leave. Some relationships are built on the unspoken agreement that you'll always be the strong one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't need. And when you start to change that dynamic, when you start asking for reciprocity, those relationships might not survive. That's painful, but it's also clarifying. Because what you're left with are the connections that can hold the fullness of who you are, not just the carefully curated version you've been showing. And here's something that often goes unsaid. People who endure quietly are often terrified that if they stop, if they let go of their iron self-control, they'll completely fall apart. That once they start crying, they'll never stop. That if they admit how hard things have been, they'll be overwhelmed by the enormity of it. So they hold on tight, convinced that silence is the only thing keeping them intact. But this fear, while understandable, isn't quite accurate. Emotions, when finally acknowledged and expressed, don't destroy you. They move through you. The crying does eventually stop. The anger, once expressed, begins to lose its grip. The fear, once named, becomes a little less terrifying. What's been keeping you barely holding on isn't the emotions themselves, but the constant effort to suppress them, to keep them contained, to never let anyone see. Imagine holding a beach ball underwater. It takes constant effort, constant vigilance, constant energy. That's what emotional suppression is like. You're always working, always holding, never able to fully relax because the moment you do, something might surface. But if you let the ball rise, if you stop fighting it, yes, it surges upward, yes, there's a splash, but then it simply floats. It doesn't sink you. It just is, bobbing on the surface, no longer requiring that exhausting, constant pressure to keep it down. This is what healing can look like. Not the absence of difficult emotions, but the freedom to feel them without being destroyed by them. Not becoming someone who never struggles, but becoming someone who knows how to struggle less alone. Not erasing your past or the patterns it created, but slowly, gently, creating new options alongside the old. And perhaps most importantly, healing involves grief. Grief for what was lost, for the childhood you deserved but didn't get, for the years spent carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. This grief is not weakness or wallowing. It's recognition. It's honoring the truth of what happened and what it cost. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge, and for people who endure quietly, acknowledgement itself can feel like the hardest step. Because to acknowledge means to admit it hurt. To admit it hurt means accepting that what you experienced wasn't normal or acceptable, even if it wasn't dramatic or overt. And that acceptance can feel like a betrayal of the people who shaped you, the family you came from, the identity you've built around being low maintenance and self-sufficient. But accepting reality isn't betrayal. It's honesty. And honesty, even when painful, is the ground on which real healing is built. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with realizing how long you've been carrying weight that wasn't yours. The parentified child who took care of their siblings when they should have been playing. The teenager who comforted their depressed parent when they needed comforting themselves. The young adult who handled family crises while their own dreams got postponed indefinitely. Each of these roles, taken on out of necessity or love or survival, came with a cost. The cost of their own childhood, their own needs, their own right to be cared for. And grieving that isn't self-pity. It's an essential part of healing. Because only when you fully acknowledge what you lost can you begin to give yourself what you needed. You can't parent yourself through the healing process if you're still pretending that nothing was missing in the first place. The grief, as painful as it is actually a doorway. On the other side of it is the possibility of offering yourself the compassion and care you deserved all along. You might always be someone who processes internally, who needs solitude to recharge, who carefully considers before speaking. These aren't flaws that need fixing, but there's a difference between choosing quiet and being silenced, between preferring solitude and feeling isolated, between being selective with vulnerability and being unable to access it at all. The former is temperament. The latter is trauma, and knowing the difference matters. What you're moving toward isn't a loud, unfiltered, constantly expressive version of yourself. It's a version that has choice. That can endure when endurance is truly needed, but can also ask for help when help would lighten the load. That can be strong for others without losing the ability to be soft for themselves. That can hold space for both, for the quiet strength that has carried you this far and for the tender places that still need healing. Consider how this might look in everyday moments. You're having a hard day, feeling overwhelmed by everything on your plate. In the past, You would have pushed through alone, told no one, handled it internally. But now you have options. You might text a friend and say, "I'm having a rough day, could use some encouragement." Simple words, but they represent a seismic shift from suffering in silence. And when your friend responds with care, with "I'm here, tell me about it," or even just "I'm sorry," sending you love, something inside you relaxes. You're not alone, you don't have to be. Or maybe you're in a relationship and your partner has been distant lately. Old patterns would have you withdraw, assume you did something wrong, suffer quietly while pretending everything's fine. But now you might say, "I've noticed you've seemed distant lately, and I'm feeling a bit disconnected. Can we talk about it?" Vulnerable words. Scary words for someone who learned that expressing needs leads to disappointment. But you say them anyway. And even if the conversation is difficult, even if there's no easy resolution, you've done something profound. You've let yourself be seen. You've prioritized connection over self-protection. If you're someone who has endured quietly for as long as you can remember, this moment, reading these words, is an opportunity to see yourself differently. Not as damaged or broken, not as too much or not enough, but as someone who developed remarkable survival skills in response to circumstances that required them. You did what you needed to do to get through, and that was enough. It's still enough. You are enough. But enough doesn't mean you have to stay the same forever. Enough doesn't mean you can't grow, can't soften, can't learn new ways of being. You can honor the person who learned to endure while also becoming the person who knows when to stop enduring and start living. Both can be true. Both can coexist. The world needs people like you. People who understand suffering from the inside out, who can hold complexity, who don't rush to fix what simply needs to be felt. But the world also needs you to be okay, genuinely okay, not just performing okayness for everyone's comfort. And that starts with letting yourself be seen, really seen, by at least one person who can handle what they find there. That person might be a therapist, a friend, a partner, or eventually yourself. But whoever it is, they need to be someone who understands that beneath the quiet exterior is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence, not indifference but a carefully managed ocean of feeling that's been waiting, sometimes for decades, for someone to say, "You can let it out now, it's safe, I'm here. I'm not leaving. Your pain won't destroy me, and it doesn't make you less worthy of love." Because that's the deepest truth that people who endure quietly need to hear. Your pain, your needs, your vulnerability, none of it makes you less lovable. It makes you human. And being human means sometimes falling apart, sometimes needing help, sometimes being too much and not enough all at once. It means being messy and complicated and impossible to summarize in neat categories. And none of that disqualifies you from belonging, from connection, from love. There's a moment that often comes in therapy when someone who has endured quietly finally breaks. Not a dramatic breakdown, but a quiet crumbling. They're telling a story, probably minimizing it, probably apologizing for taking up time, and the therapist stops them. Gently but firmly says, "You keep saying it wasn't that bad, but I'm hearing a lot of pain in your story." And something about being seen, truly seen, cracks the dam they've been holding back for years. The tears come and they apologize through them. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm crying." And the therapist says, "You're crying because you're finally safe enough to." And in that moment, they understand something profound. Their strength wasn't in never crying. Their strength was in surviving long enough to find a place where crying was allowed. So if you've been enduring quietly, carrying weights you never speak about, wearing masks that no one sees through, know this. The strength it took to survive doesn't have to be the same strength you use to live. Survival and thriving require different skills. What got you here won't necessarily get you there. And learning new ways of being, softer ways, more honest ways, isn't weakness. It's evolution. You are not alone in this. Even in your silence, even in your solitude, even in the dark moments when you're convinced no one could possibly understand, you are not alone. There are countless others who know exactly what it's like to carry everything privately, to smile through pain, to function while falling apart inside. And while that shared experience doesn't erase the loneliness, it does mean that if you ever find the courage to speak, to reach out, to admit you're not okay, you'll discover a whole community of people who will nod in recognition and say, "Me too, I know, I understand." And perhaps that's where the quiet endurance begins to transform into something else. Not loud proclamations or dramatic revelations, but simple, honest connection. The kind where you can say, "This is hard," and someone responds, "I know, I'm here." Where you can admit struggle without having a solution. Where you can be less than perfect and still be welcomed. Where your humanity, in all its complicated, beautiful, broken wholeness, is enough. That's not a fantasy. That's possible. It exists. And it's waiting for you on the other side of the silence you've maintained for so long. Not demanding that you become someone else, but inviting you to be more fully yourself, to let the tender places breathe, to discover that being seen doesn't have to mean being hurt. The journey from quiet endurance to lived authenticity is not short, and it's rarely easy, but it's worth it. Not because you owe the world your story, but because you deserve to live unburdened by constant performance, unshackled by the belief that your needs don't matter, free from the exhausting work of pretending everything is fine when it's not. Think about all the years you've spent being strong for others. Think about all the times you've held space for someone else's pain while carrying your own. Think about all the moments you've smiled when you wanted to cry, said yes when you needed to say no, minimized your struggles to make others comfortable. All of that service, all that giving, all that strength, it came from somewhere. It came from you. And it's beautiful, but it's also exhausting. And you don't have to do it alone anymore. You've been strong for so long. Maybe now it's time to discover what it feels like to be held, to let someone else carry something for a change, to trust that the world won't end if you stop holding it all together. Because the truth is, you were never meant to endure everything alone. That was a story you learned, not a truth you were born into. And stories, even the ones we've lived by for decades, can be rewritten. Not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, with patience and courage and the radical act of believing that you deserve better than silent suffering. You do deserve better. And recognizing that, truly believing it, is where everything begins to change. It starts with one small act of honesty, one moment of admitting, even just to yourself, that you're tired of carrying everything alone. One decision to reach out, to speak up, to let the mask slip just a little, and then another moment, and another, until slowly, gradually, the weight begins to lift. Not because the struggles disappear, but because you're no longer facing them in isolation. There will be setbacks. There will be days when the old patterns feel safer, when retreating into silence seems easier than the vulnerability of connection. And that's okay. Healing isn't about never struggling. It's about building a foundation solid enough to hold you when you do. It's about surrounding yourself with people who understand that strength isn't the absence of need, but the courage to express it. And somewhere in that process, something beautiful happens. You begin to realize that the things you were most afraid of, being seen as weak, being too much, being abandoned, those fears were based on old data. They were true once in the environment where you learned them, but they're not universal truths. And as you encounter new experiences, new relationships, new evidence that vulnerability can be met with care rather than dismissal, those old fears begin to lose their power. You start to understand that the people worth having in your life are the ones who can handle your complexity, who don't need you to be simple or easy or always okay, who love you for your depth, not despite it, who see your quiet strength and honor it, but who also see your hidden struggles and don't turn away. Those people exist, and you deserve to have them in your life. The child you were, the one who learned that needs were burdens and emotions were inconveniences, that child is still inside you. They've been waiting all this time for someone to turn toward them with kindness and say, "I see you, I hear you, you matter." For most of your life, you've been hoping someone else would offer that. But the truth is, the most important person who needs to offer it is you. You need to become the one who sees that child, who validates their pain, who promises them they don't have to earn love by being invisible. This is the work of reparenting yourself. It's giving yourself what you needed then, as best you can now. It's holding space for your own emotions with the patience and attentiveness you deserved from the beginning. It's learning to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love who's hurting, not with harsh criticism or dismissal, but with gentleness and understanding. And as you do this work, as you slowly build a relationship with yourself based on compassion rather than criticism, something shifts. You become less dependent on external validation because you're learning to offer it to yourself. You become less afraid of abandonment because you're no longer abandoning yourself. You become less prone to enduring in silence because you're creating an internal environment where your voice matters. This doesn't happen overnight. It's the work of months and years, of practicing new ways of being, of catching yourself in old patterns and gently redirecting toward healthier ones. It's messy and non-linear and sometimes frustrating, but it's also profoundly liberating. Because with each small step toward self-compassion, toward honest expression, toward authentic connection, you're reclaiming parts of yourself that got lost in the silence. And eventually, you might look back and realize that the weight you once carried constantly has become lighter. Not because life got easier, but because you learned to share the load. Not because you became someone different, but because you became more fully yourself, no longer hiding behind masks or minimizing your experience to make others comfortable. You might realize that you can now feel joy without immediately suppressing it, fear you'll lose it. That you can admit when you're struggling without feeling like a burden. That you can ask for help without shame. That you can set boundaries without guilt. That you can receive love without suspicion. These might seem like small things to those who have always had them. But for someone who learned to endure quietly, each one is a revolution. And here's what's beautiful. As you heal, as you learn to honor your own needs and emotions, you often become even better at supporting others. Not from a place of martyrdom or self-denial, but from genuine abundance. Because you're no longer giving from an empty well. You're no longer sacrificing yourself to help others. You're offering from overflow, from a place of having enough and choosing to share, rather than from a place of never having enough but giving anyway. This is what sustainable compassion looks like. It's the difference between codependence and genuine care. It's being able to say, I want to help you, and I also need to take care of myself. It's showing up for others without disappearing from your own life. And it models something powerful for the people around you. It shows them that it's possible to be kind without being self-sacrificing, to be strong without being invulnerable, to care deeply without carrying everything alone. So if your birthday ever feels like just another day, if you've spent years enduring quietly, if you've become so accustomed to carrying weight alone that you've forgotten what it feels like to put it down, please hear this. You are not condemned to live this way forever. The patterns that shaped you are powerful, but they're not permanent. Change is possible. Connection is possible. A life where you feel seen and valued and supported is possible. It starts with one moment of honesty, one admission that you're tired, one reach for connection, one decision to stop pretending you're fine when you're not, and then another moment, and another, building slowly, brick by brick, a life where quiet doesn't mean suffering, where strength doesn't mean isolation, where you can be both capable and in need of support, both resilient and deserving of rest. The person you are beneath all the armor, beneath all the performance, beneath all the silent endurance, that person is worth knowing. They're worth fighting for. They're worth the messy, difficult, beautiful work of healing. And they're worth celebrating, not just on designated days, but in the small, ordinary moments when you choose to honor your own experience instead of minimizing it. You've spent so long believing you need to earn the right to be cared for, but you don't. You never did. Your worth isn't contingent on your usefulness or your strength or your ability to never need anything. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, present from the moment you were born and continuing through every moment since, regardless of what you've accomplished or endured or hidden. And maybe that's the final truth that needs to be said. That people who endure quietly are not admirable because of their silence. They're admirable because they survived. Because despite every message they received that their needs didn't matter, despite every moment of feeling unseen and unheard, despite the profound loneliness of carrying everything alone, they kept going. They made it here. They're still trying. They're still hoping, even quietly, even secretly, that things can be different. And they can be. Different is possible. Better is possible. A life where you don't have to endure quite so quietly, quite so alone, quite so long. That life is waiting. Not in some distant future when you've healed perfectly or become someone else entirely. But now, today, in the next small choice you make to honor yourself, to speak your truth, to reach for connection instead of retreating into silence. You've been holding your breath for so long. Maybe it's time to exhale. Maybe it's time to let someone see you shake. Maybe it's time to discover that the world you were so afraid would reject your vulnerability might actually meet it with tenderness. You won't know until you try. And trying, even imperfectly, even scared, even just a little bit, is how everything changes. So this is for everyone who has ever endured quietly, who has carried weight no one could see, who has smiled through pain, functioned through exhaustion, shown up for others while falling apart inside. You are seen now. Your struggle is real. Your pain is valid, and you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. And being human means needing connection, needing support, needing to be witnessed in our struggle as much as in our strength. The journey ahead won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Because on the other side of silence is not just noise, but voice, your voice. The one that's been waiting all this time to be heard, to matter, to count. And it does, it always has. Even in the quietest moments, even in the deepest silence, your voice has always mattered. Now it's just time to believe it.